So this one's about the orbital jumper concept. That's a term I created to describe some phenomena that I have been through personally, that I have tried to develop in my own craft of my music and my life, because it applies to music, but it also applies to other things. So there's really not one particular concrete definition for the orbital jumper. The initial idea came from the idea of the valence electron and thinking of how electricity is produced. It jumps to this outer loop, and you have this, generation of electricity. It should just be going in its loop, but it wants to break free, right? So, taking that concept and going with that with the music world, you have these levels, the zones that you reach. And it's a bit like stretching. I love to use the stretching analogy here, to where you get into this mode of stretching where you can really go far. And especially if you do it for a while, like you can really go crazy with stretching. And it's not just about releasing tensions in your muscles, but it's about being able to do more with your body. And anyway, so in the zone of music and things like that and creative outlets, you can do the same thing with pushing the boundaries of your creative process. And so what we do, though, is it's a fearlessness. And the fearlessness is there's no support for creative music. That's problem number one. And problem number two is there's no industry for creative music. And that's problem number two. And problem number three is no one really gets it. So you're on your own for a while. Now, once you get past that little hurdle, you can get into making creative music, making original music. And that's more fun than just being another cookie cutter knockoff artist, which is about 99% of the music industry right now. It's like they do really incredible things, but they're just copying from a template. And the template's provided by big time thinkers of the corporate world. And the corporate world needs to check itself before it wrecks itself, because it needs to get out of the business of telling artists how it is and how to do music. It's sickening. And that's why artists have been at war with this whole process. But anyways, back to the orbital jumper concept. It's just an idea about creativity, to where you reach realms of music you shouldn't be tampering with, and then you take about 10 steps further into that realm, and you develop this world from this accident. So you do some sort of incidental thing, they're called happy accidents, and then you embellish on that, and you create this immersive world based on just a phenomena, right? And it's much more interesting. But what it does is you got to break free of the original structure. And that's where the orbital jumper concept comes along, because it feels so good and tasty when you're in the basic level of creation. Like, things are going okay, and they're just not, they don't have the fire, they don't have the spark. But the layer above that, when you really, or maybe you're working on something for an hour, but what if you're working on something for 10 days? It's something else opens up. But really, it doesn't happen in a time frame like that. It's more in the microscopic realm, where you're just thinking about things and you're doing experiments and it's going okay. And then maybe middle of the song, you get this flash of like this incredible new opening. It's almost a portal. I guess you could say being an orbital jumper is being a portal jumper. And so you jump into that and you can blow it up. You can blow the track into the next level. And that's why, you can really take a new approach with all these new tools in this new level, and you create something that is unique. And it's something you have to fine tune and harness, because what happens is you can do that and then it will backfire and you've just ruined all your ideas previously. Somehow the creative link If you kill the motif accidentally, then you can wipe out what you were just working on. And so that's where the slippery slope of creativity is. But most times, taking that orbital jump is difficult, but it leads to more interesting things in the end. And you become more original because you're taking your orbital jump off from a basic template way of doing things. It's like you're going from paint by numbers to sculpting and designing and coding the actual world of music. You're no longer playing by the fixed rule set of the linear structure of development. Now you're dealing with exponentialities, and it's just exciting, but it's terrifying because music leaves you hanging if you're not careful. And like I said before, there's no structural support for creative artists. And what they do is they make these facades of these creative artists who are just these wacko type, you name it, just weirdo type artists. But that's really not what being a creative artist is all about. We're talking about like the difference between somebody who's got an understanding of the commercial aspects of how to appeal to a broad audience, but can also come up with some unique, cool stuff. And that's another balancing act, because if you go too far off the deep end, you lose touch, you lose the connection. But if you don't go off the deep end at all, then you just created another knockoff of something else from another time from somebody else. And I have luck with this. I have luck with this notion, because what happens with me is no matter what I do with somebody else's work or inspired by somebody else's work, I always make it my own. And I've always done this just by default. I don't even do it on purpose. It's just because I'm hearing, other things that could have been done or could be done or were meant to be, just because I've had so much exposure to music for so very long since I was young. So I'm pretty fortunate to where I can jump into something and then it will become my own. And that's also orbital jumping, because what you're doing there is you're hoping to get more out of what you're working on. And that is the creative process. Are you going to sit down and come up with what you intend, what you visualize, or are you going to sit down and come up with something much more, which is much more exciting? That's where this whole excitement in the discovery of creativity is involved. And to tell you the truth, it's only gotten stronger with me as I've gotten older. I haven't done any recreational drugs or drinking in my entire 40 years. And trust me, I've dealt with the blows of life. Let me tell you, one after another. And my father died when I was born, so it's not been an easy trail. So I don't want to make it seem like I've had a picnic of a life. And there's been many more obstacles beyond that I've had to deal with and overcome. And so I don't use those things as my crutch. Let's just put it that way. I just absorb the blows, and I try to keep going and stay strong like everyone else, with the added bonus of never losing that focus. And that focus is what makes me really unique in the creative realm, because most or a lot of people, they use those recreational tools, let's just say, to go to the next level, the next tier. And that's not the same process at all. So when I do it, it's my own unique signature is what I'm trying to get at. Whereas when others will do it, it will be their own unique signature. And so if you take any idea and you start with a basic idea, well, there's so much more going on once you start to do the painting. So once you start doing the notation, once you start performing in the pieces, once you take the idea that's in your head and manifest it into this physical realm, you'll find some things work as expected, and a lot of times nothing works as expected, because that is the nature of this world. It is counterintuitive. This world is not meant to be looked at and spied on and copied very easily. We've gotten to a point where we can do some things that will mimic some properties of this world and leverage certain aspects of what this world is capable of mechanically. But we never, ever, ever get the expected result. And that's part of the concept of creativity, where you always shoot for something, but then you get something else, but maybe that's still good, right? And what we're really trying to do, though, as time moves on, is get closer and closer to being able to manifest the mind visions of music into the real world. And we can actually even go beyond that, and that is the point. That you will come up with something basic, and then once you start working with the palette of tools, and thanks to all the genius, the true genius creators and coders and makers of the instruments and makers of the DAWs and makers of the samples and makers of the techniques and designs, and the inspiration is in that world, that is like a feedback loop. So you have a pretty positive feedback loop if you know where to look. And so that's where the orbital jumping comes into play as well, because there's so much more to all this stuff. And when you work with chords, and when you work with notation, and when you work with patterns, and when you do ad-libbing, and when you do sound design experiments, there's always more going on than what you thought there was initially. And that is what orbital jumping is all about, because you're not taking what you initially had, you're taking that and you're taking more. You're going beyond it, and you're going far beyond it. You can't control it anymore. All you can do is shape that sucker into some kind of meaningful output, hopefully, in the end result. And that's a thing that also changes over time. You may listen to your piece one year and it'll sound one way, but another year it'll sound another way. Your own piece. So that's how tricky it all is. But there's no question about it. Being an orbital jumper and being able to jump when the time is right and abandon the previous work structure is really an interesting technique to develop, because that's where you get closer to sounding like yourself.